He felt no pain, even when his body was breaking. He was just a child, and nothing about him seemed unusual. He ran, played, and explored the world like any other kid. Everything felt normal, predictable, safe. Until one day, something unexpected happened. He fell hard. The kind of fall that usually causes an immediate reaction. But he didn't react. He simply stood up, looked around, and kept going as if nothing had happened. At first, his parents thought he was just strong, maybe even unusually calm, but then it happened again and again. The same pattern, repeating in quiet, subtle ways. Over time, they began to notice something different. He would bump into things and keep walking. He would trip and continue playing. There was no hesitation, no pause, no sign that anything had affected him. It was as if his body was missing an important signal, something every human depends on: pain. At first, it didn't seem like a problem. In fact, it almost felt like something positive. A child who never complains, a child who never reacts, a child who always keeps going. But slowly, that idea began to change. Because pain has a purpose. It protects, it warns, it creates limits. Without it, the body doesn't know when to stop. One day, he touched something very hot. A normal reaction would be immediate, but he didn't pull his hand away. He didn't notice what was happening. There was no clear signal, no internal alert, no sense that something required attention. His parents reacted quickly, but he seemed confused by their concern. That's when they realized something was different. Not because of what he felt, but because of what he didn't feel. As time passed, small signs began to appear. Nothing dramatic at first, just subtle changes. Things that normally would be noticed went completely unnoticed. And that's when the situation became more important. Because pain is what helps us recognize key moments. Without it, everything feels the same. A fall feels like a step. A mistake feels like nothing. A warning never arrives. He began to show small physical changes over time, without even noticing. At school, the same pattern continued. He would fall, stand up, and keep going as if nothing had happened. Teachers didn't understand. Other children didn't understand. But his body was being affected in ways he couldn't notice. And that's what made everything so unusual. Because the real challenge wasn't what he experienced. It was what his body couldn't communicate. Simple situations became harder to manage, not because they were complex, but because there was no internal signal guiding his response. That's when doctors began to investigate more carefully. They ran multiple tests. Reflexes were normal. Movement was normal. Everything seemed fine, except for one thing: the ability to recognize certain signals. And that's when they found the explanation: a rare condition. Congenital insensitivity to pain. A condition where the body does not process certain signals the way it should. At first, it might sound unusual, even interesting, but in reality, it creates a completely different way of experiencing the world. Because pain is not just discomfort, it is information. It shapes behavior. It defines limits. It prevents repetition of mistakes. Without it, everyday life becomes unpredictable. Over time, his family had to adapt. They had to observe more carefully. They had to pay attention to small details that normally wouldn't matter. Not because he was fragile, but because his body didn't communicate in the usual way. And that changes everything. It changes how you move, how you react, how you learn. Because learning often depends on feedback, and pain is one of the strongest forms of feedback the body has. Without it, experience doesn't register in the same way. Actions don't carry the same meaning, and that creates a unique challenge. Because what seems like an advantage can quickly become a limitation. A life without pain is not necessarily easier. It removes one difficulty, but introduces another. Because without clear signals, decisions become uncertain, boundaries become unclear, and the body relies entirely on external awareness. Over time, this creates a different relationship with the world, one where attention replaces instinct, where observation replaces reaction, where safety depends on awareness, not sensation. And that's what makes this condition so fascinating. Not because something is added, but because something essential is missing. A system that most people never think about. A signal that operates silently, constantly, automatically, until it's gone. And when it's gone, everything changes. Because pain is not just something we avoid, it is something that guides us. It shapes behavior in ways we rarely notice. It creates patterns. It builds understanding. And without it, the world feels different. Not louder, not quieter, just less defined, less clear, less structured. And that's the real impact. And without it, the world feels different. Not louder, not quieter, just less defined, less clear, less structured. And that's the real impact. Because what we call discomfort is often what keeps everything working as it should. And without it, the world feels different. Not louder, not quieter, just less defined, less clear, less structured. And that's the real impact. Because what we call discomfort is often what keeps everything working as it should. And without it, the world feels different. Not louder, not quieter, just less defined, less clear, less structured. And that's the real impact. Because what we call discomfort is often what keeps everything working as it should. And when that disappears, the body must find new ways to adapt, new ways to respond, new ways to stay safe. And that is not simple. It requires constant awareness, constant attention, constant adjustment, because the usual signals are no longer there, and in their place, there is silence.